All right, welcome back. Now we're going to look at 4-note chords. I notice I didn't say 7-note chords because not all these chords are seventh. In fact, only 2 of them are not considered seventh. So I decided to title it 4-note chords so that you know that a chord can have 4 notes but not be considered a seventh. Now let's take a list of these 11 types of 4-note chords. You have the major 6th. It's a 4-note chord, but it's not a 7th chord. You have the major 7th, dominant 7th, minor 7th, dominant 7th sus4. You have the major 7th sus4, the half diminished 7th, also referred to as the minor 7th flat 5. You have the diminished 7th, or also known as the fully diminished 7th. You also have the minor 7th, the minor 6th, which is another 4-note chord. That is not a 7th chord. And the last one we have is the augmented 7th chord. Now, we use a lot of these chords in gospel and jazz music. And a lot of the extensions that we later jump into are built on one of these 11th chords. And so it's important to understand what we call the foundation of extended chords, which is these 11 type of 4-note chords. Now let's take a look at the major 6th. And I'm just going to use white keys as examples, and then you can transpose those. If we take a C major chord and I just add the note a whole step above the 5th, we get a minor 6th. Now you might see Ridiculous showing you a minor 7/C. You can ignore that. What it's basically saying is, oh, it's recognizing it as an A minor 7th, but in first inversion. But no, this is actually a major 6th chord. And this is used a lot when ending songs. Sometimes someone might do a 2-5-1, and they might resolve it with that major 6th. This is also often played with the 9th. So you might have what we call a 6-9 chord. But just note that 4-note chord, it's a major 6. You take a major chord, any major chord, and you play the note a whole step or a tone above the 5th degree of the chord, and we get a 6. If I come here, this is G flat major 6. And it's often written as just a C, like if I use C with a 6. If I use G flat with a 6, or F sharp with a 6. And that's how you know it's a major 6 chord. If I play that's the same thing. D major with a 6. So it should be written as a D and a 6. So that's the first one. Now we look at the major 7th chord. If we take a major chord and we add another interval, a major 3rd on top of the 5th, we get a major 7th. If you think purely in terms of the key of C, it's just basically stacking thirds. They're all diatonic note, all belonging to the key of C. But because whenever we learn chords, we want to be able to recognize chords in isolation, meaning outside the context of a key, it's important to learn about the intervallic makeup. And so you take a major chord, you add a major 3rd on top of that, and you get a major 7th. Now remember that an interval of a major 3rd consists of 4 half steps. 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I play this chord, I'm not even thinking about scale right now. What is the major 7th of this chord? Then I know I need to add a major 3rd interval on top of this, which is comprised of 4 half steps in distance. 1, 2, 3, 4. If I do the same thing for this A chord, how do I add a major 7th to this? I need to add a major 3rd on top of this 5th right here. So interval of 4 half steps 1, 2, 3, 4. We get a major 7 chord. Now, a quick also side tip to recognize major 7th chord, and again you can use a scale as your guidance, is that when you build a major 7th chord within a key in its diatonic form, only chord 1 and chord 4 are naturally major 7th chords. So if I go back to the key of C and I play the 1 chord as a 7th chord, it will be a major 7, as long as I'm playing all the diatonic notes in the key of C. If I go to chord 4 and I build a 4-note chord, using all the notes of the key, I should get a major 7th chord. Chord 1 and chord 4. Those are the only 2 chords in a major key that will naturally be a major 7th chord once you turn them into 4-note chords. So as long as you know your major scale, you can quickly decipher what chords should be major 7th. You see how everything keeps going back to knowing that major scale? So if I say I'm in the key of B, B major, yeah? So I know all the notes of the B major scale. And the rule states that if I build a 4-note chord on the root, I should get a major 7th, as so long I'm playing all the notes diatonic to B major. So that's how I know what a B major 7 look like. If I go to the 4 chord and I build a 4-note chord, again sticking with the diatonic notes of the key, I should get a major 7th chord. So those are 2 ways of deciphering major 7th chord. You can first build a major chord, then add a major 3rd on top, and you get a major 7th chord. Or you can think about it from the diatonic key perspective and say, well, if I'm in the key of B and I add the next note, a 3rd part belonging to the key, it should be major 7 for chord 1 and chord 4. So those are 2 little rules. Let's take a look now at the dominant 7th chord, very closely related to the major 7. 2 ways you can look at this. If you take a major 7th chord and you lower the 7th degree by a half step, then you get a dominant 7th chord. The second way of deciphering a dominant 7th chord is based on the intervallic rule that we explained earlier about the major 7th. We take a major chord, and if we add a minor 3rd on top of this 5th, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, which comprise of 3 half steps, then we should get a dominant 7th chord. So these are 2 ways. Take a major 7th, lower the 7th by a half step, we get a dominant 7th. Or take a major chord, add a minor 3rd to it, starting on the 5th, and you get a dominant 7th chord. Now in the next lesson, I'm going to explain to you more in terms of where these chords belong naturally, in terms of like derivative, because they're not all derived from the major scale, and that's important to know when you're playing a certain chord where it comes from. So I'm going to get to that in the next lesson, but first let's get through just the makeup of these chords so we can recognize them in isolation. So again, if I go to here, this is E major. If I want to create a dominant 7th, E dominant 7th chord, I know to add a minor 3rd on top of this 5th. And I get E dominant 7th, also referred to as just E7. Another way again is to think about a major 7th chord. If this is a major 7th chord and I just lower that 7th by a half step, I get a dominant 7th. So those are 2 ways to play around with creating dominant 7ths quickly. Going down the line, the 4th chord we're going to look at now is the minor 7. Now we've looked at major 7, we've looked at dominant 7. An easy way to create a minor 7th chord is to take a dominant 7th chord, lower the 3rd, and you get a minor 7. Pretty easy, right? Take a dominant 7th chord, lower the 3rd degree, you get a minor 7. If I go to A, dominant 7, all I do is just lower the 3rd, and A get a minor 7. Let's take another one. Take a dominant 7th chord and lower the 3rd, get a dominant 7th chord. Now the other way of deciphering a dominant 7th chord is through the intervallic format. First you have to do is build a minor chord. At this point you should be able to easily build a minor chord anywhere on the keyboard. If you've gone through the intermediates guide, you know we talk about how to create minor chords, major chords, diminished chords. So if you don't know how to do that, you probably want to review that course. So this is a minor chord. All we have to do to create a 7th is to add the note a minor 3rd above the 5th. Now again, we know that a minor 3rd is built on 3 half steps. So 1, 2, 3. So that's another way. Take any minor chord, add the notes that's a minor 3rd above the 5th, and we get a minor 7 chord. Cool? Going down the line now, we're going to look at the dominant 7 sus4. Now, if you know also how to build a dominant 7th chord already, then all you have to do is raise the 3rd degree of the chord by a half step, and we get a dominant 7 sus4. Such a beautiful sound. Dominant 7 suspended 4. So if I come down here, take a dominant 7 chord, raise the 3rd a half step, we have a dominant 7 sus4. If I come up here and play F dominant 7, and then I raise the 3rd degree of the scale a half step, I have a dominant 7 sus4. So you start to realize that there's a little snowball effect going on. Once you start to learn more 7th chords, you start to see the similarities that, oh, all I have to do to get this chord is just alter that note or alter this note. And it becomes clearer and clearer. Now, again, remember, I'm going to talk about some usage of these chords in the next lesson.